I'm Jeff Cook,
And I'm TJ Wilson.
and this is Around the Circle.
I'm walking slowly, I'm taking my time. All I could talking is starting to rhyme. I'm letting go of lonely, letting go of strife. I just can't get enough of this beautiful life.
The Enneagram is a map of the human personality. It's a tool for navigating relationships, it creates language for what motivates us, and helps us look at the way we look at everything else. Most importantly, the Enneagram's a mirror because sometimes you need help seeing yourself. My name is TJ Wilson. I'm an armchair therapist in Greeley, Colorado, and with me as always is Jeff Cook, reluctant businessman, lover of theology, and Enneagram teacher.
Hello.
Jeff, my man.
I like this so much.
If this is the first time listening for anybody, they are just not going to get the joke.
It's inside joke.
They'll figure it out later. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm doing all right.
Yeah?
I need something new in my life, and this, my friend, is it.
This is it? This is the thing?
The new thing. Sometimes
Okay.
you gotta switch things up a bit.
Okay, so we've talked in the past about a lot of famous books, movies, characters. We love typing characters. And we've discussed real people who live in the public eye, like presidents. But we're doing something different today. Just as screenwriters and authors like Tolkien can write characters with discernible motivation, we also have to note that they put their own stamp on their writing, right?
Yup.
Like, you bring yourself to the page when you write. And my favorite screenwriters include Dan Harmon and Joss Whedon. Dan Harmon created Community and Rick and Morty and several other projects. And Joss Whedon's famous for Buffy and Firefly and the first two Avengers movies and Treating Women Badly scandals.
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think these two guys may be a 4 and a 7, respectively. And if you really examine their work like I have, if you really dig into it and listen to how they talk about their work, you could make an argument about their types, right? Simply from the way that they write and the way they run their projects.
Agreed.
And we could discuss whether Tolkien is a 5, exclusively looking at Bilbo Baggins.
Right?
Because that character has so much that points us toward 5 that, like, the writing of this character may have been done by a 5.
My favorite example of this recently is, so I was a massive Stephen King fan throughout middle school, high school. Every single character is stuck somewhere. And the idea that King is a 7 and writing out his... I'm going to put this person, you are stuck in a car with a rabid dog outside. You are stuck on a bed handcuffed there next to your dead husband. You are stuck in a lunatic's house who wants you to write more books. They're always stuck. Place.
Over and over again. It's great. And you can, like, knowing Stephen King and seeing some of his presence in the world, you're like, oh yeah, that guy's probably a 7.
Yep.
But today...
Come on.
We want to discuss authors of the Bible and what type they may be bringing to the stories that they are trying to tell.
Sounds nerdy.
It is probably. Now, Jeff, why do you want to talk about biblical authors?
I would. The first work that I actually started doing on Enneagram was trying to publish a book on this. The great A.J. Sherrill actually published a book very similar to what I was thinking of, and so that's out there if you ever want to look for it.
Sure.
But just love the hell out of thinking about what we bring to texts and how our personalities influence them. I do this with philosophers. I do it with songwriters. By the way, re-listened to our songwriter series while I was working out the other day. Gold. It is gold. I was so proud. So you all will know that we nerd out on those sorts of things. And it just so happens that I did a crap ton of work on the Bible for about 20 years. And I'm a professional ethicist. My focus is the ethics of Jesus. And what's interesting about Jesus is the only person in the Bible who has multiple authors writing biographies about him.
Yeah.
And that's all we really know of Jesus for the most part, is what we see through these 4 authors. But those authors bring a lot to the table in terms of their priorities, what they elevate, the story they want to tell. They have an audience. And when you really get into studying Jesus, you just can't get away from when is it being written, who's writing it, why are they writing it, and what are they trying to say about Jesus in their presentation. And I just love that material.
Yeah, I like that. Well, I have a couple of questions for you. We have to address some questions before we dig into this.
Of course.
First off, what makes you think you can type people who have been dead for thousands of years?
Because I'm really good at this.
Okay, next question.
Because they can't disprove me. Because there's some things that, as with all the writings that we look at, and even with Dan Harmon and Stephen King and the rest, it's all guessing on one front, but motive comes out. It just comes out of us in everything that we do.
Yeah.
And so if you can kind of, if you have those glasses for looking for people's motive, sometimes you can kind of see it, name it, and say, you know what, you keep bringing up relationships in this way. Yeah. And that may say something about you, your priorities, and what you're trying to communicate, not only about God, but yourself and the world and everything in it. And that can be incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
Not only that, if you were to get an advanced degree in studying ancient texts, the first thing you would do is study the biography of the person you're writing about. You would not only do that, you would have to study their original language. You would have to become at least proficient in the dialect of their culture. You'd probably need to know the geography. You would need to know all the ins and outs of, how common life worked in their city or their village, or where the political dynamics at hand, how is that influencing them? So we could talk about countless historic people who have written things, and if you get into really heady study about them, that's where you're going to go. You're going to go, who is this person who wrote this book? And so motive is just one of numerous things that we could talk about when coming to texts like these. And lo and behold, my brother, you and I, we're skilled at this.
That's true. And it's fun.
And it's
fun with it.
And at least 12 people didn't see the title of this episode and say, yeah, not for me. So for those of you.
So speaking of, that's actually another question. Like, what do we want to say to the people who have no interest in listening to this? If they've gotten this far and we want to convince them to keep going, but they do not care about biblical authors.
I so don't want to be defensive right now. I'm just going to be. Stick around. Just stick around for the first one. Just stick around for the first one. And if you say, look, this just isn't for me, it's totally understandable. Yeah. But this one, it's going to be entertaining. Two, between me and you, TJ and I are fairly progressive people. Just know that's going in, and the things that you think that somebody might say on these fronts are probably not what we're going to say.
That's probably true.
Just for the sake of that, like, how are we going to set fire to ourselves here in public? That's worth watching.
And I also, so I went to a very public high school in the middle of a large city, and one of the classes that I took in my senior year was a Bible as literature class. Mm-hmm. It was taught by a bitter ex-Catholic who looked and sounded just like Dennis Leary.
Oh, this is good times right there.
He was something else, and this class was so interesting in the way that it wanted to examine the Bible not as a scripture, but as a text, as an ancient text, much like the Iliad or the Odyssey or other ancient texts. Like, what does change about your perspective, the reader, if you look at it in a way that is not trying to get something religious out of it. If you just look at it as text, what's valuable here? Why is this lasted? What needs to be re-looked at?
Yep. Everything that we enjoy has these elements to it, from going on a walk in the sun to watching certain movies, to having conversations with people in our lives. We come to the table with our own motives.
Yep.
And what we want to get out of this. The Bible is arguably one of the most unique and influential collections of writings that there are. And how you come to the text doesn't need to be, I'm just looking for what the living God wants to say to me today. That's one thing you could do.
Sure.
You may come to the text for joy. You may come for historic understanding. You may come to understand people who are very different from you. There's all sorts of things that you can do when coming to the text. And if you study the Bible as literature, that is one lens through which you're looking at the text. And it's as worthy as any other way of coming to the Bible.
Right.
And sometimes it really matters to look at the Bible as literature.
Yep.
Because it is literature. So what elements does it share with other literature?
Yep. Fair. Love that. We need to address 3 problems.
I bet you there's lots more than that, but 3 is probably
there's 3
a good
off
cap.
the top of my head that we need to address right up front.
Let's do it.
And those 3 include oral tradition versus written word.
Okay.
Translations, because 0 of the Bible was originally written in English, and we are native English speakers. 0 of it.
That's fake news right there.
And the problem of authorship.
Bang. All right, let's do it.
Because if Moses wrote the first 5 books of the Bible, how did he write about his own death?
That was just an add on that last verse there. All right, oral tradition versus written word.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Well, so a lot of the Bible, a lot of what we read on the page was not necessarily written when it happened. It was a story that was passed down over time and then written down later.
So for me, one of the best facts and things that really helps me to understand what the Bible, quote unquote, is to understand that it is a set of writings that were edited, assembled, and sometimes written in a very short period of time after the destruction of 2 temples. The Bible is written by the Jewish people, both the Jewish scriptures and the Christian scriptures. The Jewish tradition is a very physical, temple-oriented tradition. You go to the temple on Mount Zion to present your sacrifices and commune with God. Mm-hmm. In the year 500-ish, Babylon destroys the Jewish temple and takes many of the most educated people into slavery. And when they leave, they take the one thing that they can take with them that is part of their tradition are scrolls that nobody really used.
Sure.
But when they're in Babylon, that's all they have.
Yeah.
And they begin to take those texts and they begin to read the text in a way that had never happened before. And they begin to encounter God in the text in the same way that they had when they were in the temple. And this is the new tradition. Most of the Jewish scriptures are the songs that they sung, are the histories that they had up until that point. But some of the stuff that is placed into what Christians call the Old Testament, the Jewish scriptures, are a lot of edits and writings about how do we reclaim our home? How do we move from Babylon back into Israel? Notice this. If you read just through Genesis, almost every story is about returning home. So, for example, the very first story, Adam and Eve get kicked out of a garden and they are sent east.
Yep.
And that's exactly what happened to the people who had just lost their home, their temple, their garden where they communed with God. And the question is, how do we get back?
Yeah.
The first founder of Judaism is Abraham. His whole story is moving from Babylon, is where he's from, into Israel. And that's the story. We want to go east and we want to go back west to reclaim our land. Jacob, his grandson, is kicked out of Israel. He goes east. And his whole story is, how does he do enough in order to return home? Joseph leaves Israel, goes into slavery somewhere else because he's such a great servant in this other place. He does what's required to allow his people to return home. And then the second book of the Bible is Exodus, and it's the whole story of a whole people group returning home.
Right.
All of this colors the Jewish scriptures, and it's because the Old Testament, as it were, was edited and assembled in Babylon, and then that's where they were communing with God. And for the New Testament, it's the same thing. The Jewish temple is destroyed in 70 A.D. Most of the Christian writings, except for Paul's letters and Hebrews, are written after that event. And it's again, the temple no longer is there. How do we connect with God, encounter God? And the early Christian movement, which is a Jewish movement, is meeting this new experience of God in Christ, both through the text, but also through the bread and wine. And a lot of the early Christian scriptures are about what does it look like for us to assemble now that there's no temple. And so in both instances, Old and New Testament, it's the temple is destroyed. What do we do? And these texts are what emerge.
So it kind of sounds like if I were to give a TLDR summary of what you just said, it kind of sounds like accuracy isn't the point, and that's okay.
Well, motive of the author becomes central.
Right.
What are these authors trying to do with these texts? Because what they're not trying to do is abide by 20th century standards for a historian, for example.
Yes.
And even historians today sometimes will be very loose with how do you assemble facts, as it were.
Right.
This isn't what's necessarily going on. And only a few of the books of the Bible, really, maybe 10, are about history.
Right.
Most of the books, there's 66 books in the Bible. Most of them are not written as history.
There's something else.
They're letters, they're apocalypse, they're poems, they're wisdom literature.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different types of literature in the scriptures.
And so when we ask questions like, what do you do about oral tradition versus written? What do you do with the quote unquote actual authorship? Like even this issue of translations, like, yes, obviously the whole Bible is written in different languages and none of them are English, and we're reading someone else's interpretation.
Right.
Accuracy isn't the point.
Well, actually, on this front, say it were the case that I was giving advice to a Bible translator. I think it's very likely that, the Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek that we have, for the most part, is pretty close to what is originally penned. So I know what it's like to be an author, and I go through drafts and all the rest. But for the most part, this is what gets sent around, and this is what's embraced by the community, and it becomes the established text. That's what the Bible is.
And this is the thing that lasts.
But you have to know the history of Koine Greek if you're going to translate the New Testament. You have to get into that culture. You have to understand that Koine Greek has certain metaphors that are used.
Right.
Paul is inventing words at certain points. And, he's like Shakespeare. He's slamming images together to create a word in order to get his point across. And getting into the mind, heart, setting, audience of the author is absolutely required to translate a word from Koine Greek into 21st century English.
So you're saying that they're not just out there using Google Translate?
Some of them do. Here, if you got into translations, there are some translations that are wide in scope. So, for example, the Message version tries to get the broader meaning,
right,
but not the specific words.
Yeah.
Some translations go for sentences, and they're like, we really want to nail the sentence itself. And there are some translations that are absolutely word for word, and so it reads very strange,
right?
Because Greek will put the verb first, and the noun doesn't takes 10 words to get to the object of the sentence.
And like you said, Paul's making up words, so you basically have to have your own lexicon of Paul in order to understand what the heck he's saying.
Yeah.
Just like studying Shakespeare.
Here would be the thing. It would be incredibly valuable to understand what Paul's motive is, to understand what Paul is trying to communicate. It might inform how you would translate certain words if you knew Paul's motive. And lo and behold, here we are. We're going to do some work for the folks.
Great. I love it. I'm sold. Okay, but since we're talking about typing other people, I got to ask, what's the one rule about typing other people?
You should never tell other people what type you think they are. That is, don't type them. You should let them discover this, and you should hold all of your thoughts, suggestions, beliefs to yourself, and you should always hold it loosely.
Perfect. That's great. That is so much more generous of a way to say the answer than I usually give. So
because I type everybody.
Well, I think that's enough intro. Do you have anything else you feel like you need to say before we get going?
No, I love that setup though.
Okay.
That may have been a long setup, but we're gonna get into some fun stuff.
I agree. Well then, this podcast is called Around the Circle. And we are going to go around the circle and discuss different Bible authors that we think reflect each type. You ready to get into this?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. I'd like to start with 8s because Jeff asked me to. So, 8s. Tell me about 8s.
So, 8s. Underlying feeling is anger. Very strong motive for justice. Have a radar for strength. 8s don't want to be controlled. 8s expect rejection in relationship and will often express their love through protection and power. They often push for contact. They love the truth that comes out in a fight. There is a healthy 8 voice in some of the scripture.
Now, 8s are, all about action.
Yep.
And we don't really have a lot of great examples of observing the action of these authors.
People doing stuff?
Yeah.
I got 2 that are quite active.
Okay.
Both of them are characters, though.
You beat me to that.
Yeah.
We are wanting to talk about authors, but there are also a lot of good examples of characters that didn't necessarily write anything.
Yeah.
So there will be a distinction, but we're going to mention both.
I hadn't thought about that, but I think that's very valuable.
Love it.
I love, for example, I love Jonah as an 8.
You're wrong, but that's fine.
Jonah this would be my pitch for Jonah. Jonah's family and culture is sacked by a foreign adversary, the Assyrians, beat up. And God comes to Jonah, says, Jonah, I need you to go to preach to the Assyrians how much I love them. This is a man who just saw tragedies. His heart has been cut out and stomped on the ground by the Assyrians. And he's like, no way in hell am I doing what you say. I'm going to get on a boat and go as far away as I can. And he charters a ship to Spain, which essentially is the other side of the planet.
Right.
And you will know the story. Ship sinks. He tells the people, he's bold and tells the people on board, look, it's my fault I pissed God off. So they throw him over the side. Fish swallows him, spits him back out on the seashore. God says, hey, go speak to the Assyrians. So Jonah reluctantly goes, doesn't want to be controlled, by the way, and says, God's judgment's going to come and kill every single one of you. And then he leaves. And the Assyrians say, you know what? That guy had a point. And they all repent. And Jonah, Jonah is just 4 chapters. The last 2 chapters is Jonah on the outside of the city being pissed off that the Assyrians repented.
Yeah.
He knows that God loves people and will actually restore them. And he is furious about it.
Yeah.
And he's out there and he's underneath a bush. He's he's finding shade and just mad. And God comes and says, hey, I think you got some anger issues. And that's how the book ends.
Well, I don't want to spend too much time arguing about this. I think there is a very strong argument for Jonah as a 9 as well.
Oh, okay.
Namely because of the withdrawal, the retreat, the sort of like the standing still when God tells him to move kind of thing.
I could see that. Both those, I think, just to elevate, I don't have the specific text in front of me, but both of those are hitting the same kinds of themes.
Yeah.
You will notice that if you make God, I don't want to be sacrilegious here, but if you make God a character in the narrative, as it were, what is happening is somebody has a relationship with the character, with God, and that motive, their posture towards God is coming out in exactly these ways. Nines also care about justice and harmony. Nines also don't want to be controlled. Both 8s and 9s can withdraw when they don't get their way. Lots to say there.
Yep.
My other, which I imagine you're going to agree with me, is John the Baptist.
Yeah.
And John the Baptist is likewise a withdrawer. John the Baptist has a massive radar for justice. That's all he talks about, is that God's judgment is coming, and it's going to be fire, and people are going to get torched.
Yeah.
The thing about John that's overlooked is he's out in the middle of the wilderness, but again, his people are a temple-based people. Their religious tradition is centered in a location on Mount Zion. But what John is doing is judging the terrible human beings who are running the temple in his view.
Right.
He thinks that they're wicked. He thinks that they're sold out. He thinks that God doesn't live in the temple anymore, and that's why he leaves. And what he's doing is he's dunking people in the river because he's reenacting what it looks like to reclaim the promised land.
Yeah.
When Moses led the people out of Egypt, they came to the river Jordan, they went under the Jordan waters, and they came up into the promised land. And what John the Baptist is trying to do is reenact that. So he's like, let's go under the water and we'll come up, and then we'll say that we're really sorry, and we're going to be a new people who's going to occupy the land again.
Yeah.
But it's all about justice for John. So, one, he's not going to be controlled. He's independent in his posture towards the world, highly justice focused. His ethic is, if you have 2 coats, you need to give one to your brother who doesn't have one. It seems to have a mind for the weak. And when Jesus comes, he knows that Jesus is more powerful than he is, and that comes out in his language immediately. And so John as an 8, I think is an enjoyable typing.
Yeah, I think that's a great take. I would also throw Samson in that pile.
Gonna beat up some people with a donkey jawbone.
We don't have to expand on it. The thing that he's known for is the strength.
Yeah.
So
not a very smart guy, Samson.
he's not leading with thought. Yeah.
8s always strike me as pretty intelligent.
An argument could be made that 8s are tricking you into thinking they're intelligent because of their confidence.
All hate mail can go to TJ Wilson.
You can send that to me, and I will forward it to Joey Shuey. And she will throw it right in the trash where it belongs.
I do have an author, though.
Yes, let's do an author.
All right, so this is the first time that the folks are going to come out and say, wait. There's a book called Isaiah. Isaiah is written 40 years after the temple is destroyed, the first temple, Solomon's temple. So it's written around the year 530 BC. Isaiah is written by 2 different people.
Okay.
The second half is often called Deutero-Isaiah, and it's very, very, very different than the first 39 chapters. It also has 66 chapters. Last 27 chapters of Isaiah are very different from the first 39, and there's good reasons to think that it's a different author. Mostly they're using different vocabulary, different heart, different mindset. It's probably like there's clearly a time difference. This author is the most quoted by Jesus, and Jesus has a real affection for 8s, not only John the Baptist, but Isaiah here. And the push for justice is all over the language. So if you read Isaiah 40, it's that comfort Israel passage that is about God making things right again, but specifically it talks about the princes being, brought down low.
I mean, realistically, like, open Isaiah and point to a passage, and you'll probably find near there something about the current authorities are trash and they're going to be trampled by the real authority, which is God.
Seriously, I have a book on my shelf. I should just take it down. It'll take me 2 seconds to find this passage. So Isaiah writes, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded that God sits enthroned above the circle of the earth, and its people are like grasshoppers? He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of the world to nothing. No sooner are they planted, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root in the ground than he blows on them, and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like chaff. Notice the power dynamics there.
Yeah, the language here is largely about it's not just portraying God as, God, but the active control and power of God to change things in the world.
Yeah.
is all over Isaiah.
It's sit down, be humble.
Mm-hmm.
And he's yelling it at this intro. Isaiah 40 is the beginning of Deuteronomy Isaiah. So this is the intro to what is most important to him. And he's going to say, the powerful will be torn down.
Yeah.
Notice how Isaiah 40 ends. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the powerful. No, he gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youths grow tired and weary, young men stumble and fall, but those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. The people that God is advocating for.
The underdogs.
And that's exactly the heart of an 8.
Yep. Agreed.
That is a poem. It's written as poetry. And it is an admonition. This is somebody who's standing in the gap in a place of severe suffering. This man's culture has been decimated, and they are 40 years after the fact. And so what do? Everything is broken. The leaders are terrible human beings. Where do we turn? You know what? Yahweh's not going to betray us.
Mm-hmm.
He has risen into the heart's message for an 8, and he is speaking words of truth out of that space. And the whole rest of his, the back 2/3 of the book of Isaiah, the back third of the book of Isaiah is all about that.
It seems that there's so much in the language that has to do with the transfer of power. Like, who has power, who is abusing it, and who should have power, and how do we respond to that power?
Yep. Another image there is that the image of new creation, which is all over the Christian scriptures, it begins in Isaiah, and it's a very physical image. It's not enough for God to make you feel good relationally, and it's not good enough for God to tell you mentally how things are going to go.
And there are places in other parts of the Bible and the prophetic texts that do those things, but that is not what Isaiah is about.
It's all real physical. The lion will lie down with the lamb. They will beat their swords into shovels.
Yep.
Physical imagery about what it looks like for things to be transformed.
And with intensity.
There's something about divine control there as well. That, and this, I don't know if we've mentioned this recently, but there's something about if you embrace a religious tradition and you're seeking your heart's message in God, that this is the place that you ought to go. You ought to listen for the heart's message from the divine for you. And that's really, that's just all over Isaiah. So if you're an 8 and you want to connect with God, this is a great place to go. Just an example, Isaiah 54. Though the mountains be shaken and the hills be removed, God says over me, my unfailing love for you will never be shaken, nor my covenant of peace be removed. No weapon against you will prevail. I'm not going to be betrayed by the Creator. Is all over that, and he's just living in that space, and he's probably in pain.
And even if the world is crumbling around me, I won't respond to it apart from my relationship with you.
Yep. Isaiah 53, which a lot of Christians like, is going to talk about the suffering servant. God is going to suffer for me. That's how much God loves me and won't betray me. Gonna go to these terrible places. And so, yeah,
I love that.
Boom. That's what I got for 8s. You have anything else on 8s?
I didn't have any other authors that stood out to me.
I'm
for 8s,
real excited to talk about 9s.
Oh, okay.
More so even about 1s.
Great. I love it. I love talking about nines.
I'm sure there's characters that. Do you have any characters that are nines? I don't have any characters.
Jonah.
Oh, there you go.
Jonah was the one big one. Yeah.
I bet you could find, some people that Jesus encountered, or maybe even a disciple here or there that has some 9 qualities.
I wonder if because of my attachment to the Gospel of Matthew, I sometimes wonder if Matthew was a 9.
We should talk about Matthew when we get to the end here.
Yeah.
Because it'll serve, because I think Matthew might be a 1, and he's kind of sitting on that perch, as it were, between 9 and 1.
Sure.
Yeah. I love looking at Moses as a 9.
Yeah, seriously.
Moses' whole project is connecting his people with God. And that connection, keeping them connected, is nearly everything that the man does.
Mm-hmm. And maintaining, like, not just the connection, but also trying to get the people to understand God and God to understand the people.
Yep.
Like that, so much of his interaction with God is trying to show God what the people are actually like, despite the fact that God is God and can definitely see that. And so much of his interaction with the people that he's leading is trying to get them to understand a God they don't understand.
That's a great word. Yeah. Look at God's perspective. And on the flip side, he is mediating. He often takes the posture of mediator on behalf of the people.
Right.
The image of the high priest going for the sake of the people before God, here are our sins. It's that image of mediator is all over how he structures the entire, religious order, as it were.
Right. So let's talk about 9s for a second, because we need to say what 9s are, and before we actually, launch into Moses.
Of course. 9s going to be in the body triad. Again, we're going to see tons of physical imagery when it comes to Moses.
Mm-hmm.
How Moses experiences God is nearly always very physical.
Yeah.
Underlying feeling of anger, which we can talk about quite a bit. Conflict avoider, which we can talk about quite a bit. Withdraws, which we for control, which we can talk about quite a bit.
Yep.
9s are going to attach to those who give them autonomy, and that could be part of where we go. And again, historically, Moses is one of the most important lawyers that there has ever been and may ever be, because the law is a very different way of being in the world. In the ancient world, whatever the strong man says goes. And it's a terrible way to structure a society, that the strong man says this is what is true and who should be punished and who we're going to execute because I'm the one who's in charge. And what Moses says is that we're all equal before the law. And that egalitarian focus is the beginning. That is the roots of the modern world. Mm-hmm. And it's in this ancient tradition. But that understanding that we're all equal before the law, again, equality, justice, it's the place of, we're going to see it all over. If you get into Leviticus or Deuteronomy, you're going to see a lot of laws that are seeking to make things stable communally. Mm-hmm. So you have done this awful thing. This is what restitution looks like.
Yep.
You punched a guy in the face. He lost a tooth. You need to have a tooth removed. And now everything is copacetic. Everything is equal. Yep. We're on a similar playing field.
Let's calm it all down. You lost a tooth? Let's get a tooth from him. That's it.
So you hit my kid. I don't get to go hit your kid and your sister.
Right. Because that's not fair.
That's escalation. The one thing Moses hates more than anything is escalation.
Yeah.
Things get out of control real fast, and then, you killed my brother, I'm going to kill your family. I kill your family, you're going to come after my tribe. You kill my tribe. We're at war.
Now we're at war, and it's a whole thing, and Moses doesn't want any of that. It's too much work. I definitely want to draw attention to what I see as Moses' resignation.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of his story that is about accepting something that he doesn't want, and just being like, okay, I guess that's it.
to build on that, it's paired with, I think, an underlying understanding that his presence matters.
Yeah.
It's a both and.
Yeah, that's got to be him. Yeah.
Let's get into this.
Yeah, let's hit anger first.
Okay. Well, it starts in one of the very first stories. He has a privileged position, grows up in the house of the Pharaoh, and so he's surrounded by royalty. But he sees a slave being beaten one day, and something in him snaps.
Yeah.
And he kills the man who's assaulting the slave.
Yeah.
And apparently there's an underlying anger there. He has seen slavery since he was an infant.
And he's also known that he was one of them, right? We assume that?
Arguably. He probably doesn't look like the other Egyptian kids at school.
Right, right.
I would imagine there's something there.
Yeah, the idea of seeing both sides is very interesting, talking about someone who is of Jewish heritage, living in the palace of Egypt, who enslaved the Jewish people.
Yeah. I don't know that he's ever culpable. I don't know that he's directing enslaved people.
Yeah, we would have to make up our own version of it. There's nothing to say. We can point to the fact that he has his foot in two different camps.
Yeah. Notice how that is actually a sweet spot, as it were.
Right.
If you were going to pick a type of person that you want in that space, that might be a very valuable person to have in that space. It can't be understated that he understands the language of politics in that culture.
Mm-hmm.
And because he does, he's able to navigate it in order. I mean, historically speaking, and you can look at Paul Johnson, who's an English historian, writes a fantastic book called The History of the Jews. And he goes through how it's very likely that something like this event happens, that a man like Moses leads a large number of enslaved people out of Egypt at this point in time.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at the whole history of the earth, it just doesn't happen. Like this, historically speaking, this is an almost singular event.
Sure.
And it's just incredibly praiseworthy on that front.
And all instigated by a guy who didn't really wanna.
And I imagine you take him, kind of take him at his word on that one. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Kills a man. Does he fess up to it? Does he say, "I'm a prince and F you. I'll do what I want"?
No, of course he doesn't. He runs away.
He runs away.
He straight up bails.
Leaves the country. Withdraw is all over this character.
Yeah.
Or another word for that might be conflict avoider.
Yeah. Like someone who knew and was fully certain of their sort of position of power probably wouldn't have run away from that.
Right.
He just lied about it. Like, yeah, I saw him doing something he shouldn't have, so I killed him.
At this point in time, laws don't matter. You're a prince.
Right. Right.
You want to see, go look at what Saddam Hussein's kids did.
Yeah.
They
didn't
go
get in trouble
look.
for stuff.
look at what the privileged elite, do, what their children do, and he runs away. It says a lot about him, and also anger that comes out in crazy spurts. And we see this not only here, we're going to see it in two other famous stories. One being the golden calf story, and the other being when he strikes the rock.
Yeah.
The anger is always kind of there. And then when it gets unleashed, it's like, oh, okay, this is a monumental event,
Comes
apparently.
out a little bit sideways. Maybe makes some mistakes while he's angry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You take these 10 commandments and shove it. Doesn't think his presence matters, and doesn't think that he's capable of doing things that are important. So burning bush, God appears to him after 40 years of being exiled. Notice the exile theme. And God says, I need you to go back and do this very important thing. And the first thing that Moses says is, I don't have what it takes.
I know speak good.
Yeah.
That's probably an important thing, but it shouldn't be me.
God says, I'll send your brother and you will speak for your brother. Isn't that how that goes? Or no, it's the opposite. Your brother will speak for you.
Yeah. Your brother will speak for you. You're the one doing it, but you don't have to be the face of it.
The thing I love is that he shows up and he says, and he has demands, political demands. These are political demands. You have a workforce, oh Pharaoh, and we have demands. I represent the workforce. You're enslaved masses. And the thing that we want is 3 days off. That is the ninest request you can have, man.
We're going to talk about this more, but like so much of what he is bringing to the negotiating table is compromise.
It's compromise, and the thing that we want is just some rest.
Yeah. Like, just give us a day off, man. We just want to rest.
Just want to go over here, worship the Lord, and then we'll come back and start working again.
Just 3 days, right?
Just 3 days.
Just 3 days.
Moses doesn't lead an army to overthrow the Pharaoh. You'll notice everything is outsourced in terms of how they escape.
Yeah.
God's the one that comes and says, I'm going to strike, Egypt with these plagues.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about this when we looked at our villains, 9 villains. They never have bloody hands.
Right. Of course not.
It's always somebody else is doing it.
I'm going to have someone else do the dirty work for me.
That was my favorite thing that I realized re-looking at this. I was like, he doesn't have any blood on his hands.
Yeah.
There's a handful of characters in the Bible. We have already mentioned Samson, who are more than happy to pick up arms and beat some suckers up.
Yep.
Especially with the power of God at your side. Moses totally is conflict avoidant.
Yeah. The one time he gets blood on his hands, he runs away.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Not doing that again.
Yeah.
They escape enslavement. He is now the leader of a large number of former enslaved peoples, and they got to make some stuff up from scratch. Like, how are you going to be in the world?
Mm-hmm.
So if you read the book of Exodus, first half is about them, this story of Moses and them leaving Egypt. Second half of Exodus is where everybody who tries to read the Bible from beginning to end stops. Because you're going to hit somewhere in the middle of Exodus, you're going to hit a very detailed description about how to build a tent. And it's going to last for 15 chapters. And you're going to say to yourself, what the hell is a cubit? And
the inner thing is 47 cubits by 27 cubits. And the outer thing is, it's nuts.
1, dare we say this is meandering? And 2, the entire project is how do I connect people with God?
Yeah.
I'm gonna build a tent where people come and they have communion with God.
Yeah.
And that's the entirety of the rest of the book, is just talking about the creation, notice, of a space where people encounter God.
Well, and I think like Moses is credited as writing the first 5 books, right? And most of our discussion so far has been about Moses the character, but Moses the author. I think this is a big part of what we're seeing throughout those 5 books is how do you be a people? How do you connect to God? How do you connect to others? And how do you connect to God? And it is it is so much about creating a community, and particularly one that's different from all of those other communities, but like what makes us us,
right?
And how do we live in harmony together,
right? Yeah. This is where, so just to nerd out for 2 seconds, very likely that there's 4 different editors, authors of the Pentateuch, of the Torah, of the first 5 books of the Bible. They are each given a letter name. You can look this up, but long story short, there has to be an early tradition. And if you want to say this is Moses, I don't think that's out of left field. Right. Somebody, so Moses takes that role as leader, judge, priest.
Yeah.
And so when you read through Leviticus, what you're going to see is very strange situations. When 2 men get in a fight and the wife of one of the men comes to the defense of her husband and grabs the other by the testicles, this is what you should do.
Right.
Now, he's not making this up.
Right.
This happened, and he had to make a decision.
Like, Joe down the street got in a fight with Steve,
Right.
and Steve's wife grabbed Joe's testicles, and Moses had to respond to it.
And this gets written down. That's essentially what Leviticus is here's all the stupid ass daytime soap opera drama that I had to deal with when we were in the middle of the desert. And here I wrote it down, and this is what the law is.
Well, and I also think that, like, to that point, one of the things that I see in the story of Exodus, and in particular the 10 Commandments and the creation of the 600 laws that are part of that, like, here's a group of people that lived in slavery, lived under the thumb of a ruler who believed himself to be God, and they did what they were told. God says make a brick, and you make a brick, and God says don't stop making a brick, and you don't stop making a brick. Like, that was their life. And then they were moved into this space of being able to make their own decisions. And when you've had 400 years of someone else telling you what to do, when you get to freedom, all of a sudden you're drinking too much at a frat party.
Yeah.
You know, like,
Yep.
like when there's no structure, you don't, like, you do stupid things.
Right.
And so Moses's role in so much of these books is about creating structure, is about helping the people relearn how to be themselves and how to live in a world where they aren't being told what to do all the time. Like, there's autonomy on that. There is compromise. There's the sort of, like, understand the person who's trying to lead you now. You need to understand him in a way that you've never seen before.
Right. I think that, and it's not just structure, but it's conflict-free structure. If you were to look just at the 10 Commandments, notice how much of it is about reducing conflict.
Right.
You know, it's I'm the Lord your God that brought you out of Egypt. You should have no other gods before me. So we got a rallying point. Right, here's a centerpiece. We all got the same God. Nobody used the Lord's name in vain. Everybody take the same day off.
Yeah.
By the way, everybody take the same day off. Right up front.
The day of rest. Man, that's just perfect. It's so good. It's baked in. And it's like the fourth thing that happens.
Commandment 4. It's really after we take care of no images, one God, no misusing God's name.
Yeah.
Now we're going to get to the important things. We get a day off.
And I mean, like, the fourth thing that happened in the universe was, like, a day of rest.
Oh, sure.
Exists.
Yes, there you go. We haven't. So the person doing the creation narrative wants to really make sure that everyone knows. Even God needs to take a break, y'all.
There's a whole day. Even God rested. So take a day off. Jeez.
Okay, so the back half, the last 6 commandments. Just notice whether or not these will reduce conflict in your society, right? Honor your father and mother so that you may live long in the land.
Yep.
No fighting within the family, right?
Yeah.
You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. That's not fornication, y'all. That is, don't sleep with Joe's wife next door.
Yep.
Because then there's going to be a fight in the neighborhood.
Yep. Yep.
You shall not steal. That would lead to conflict. We've talked about this in the past. There's nothing that infuriates me more than when somebody steals from me.
Yeah.
Just pisses me off so badly. Yeah. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. Justice element, but also lying creates division.
Yep.
We're going to even cut to the last one. We're going to cut to the root of this all. You shall not covet your neighbor's house, wife, donkey, anything that belongs to your neighbor. No coveting.
It's theirs. Let it be theirs.
Envy's bad for your heart.
Yep.
Anyway, you'll see how that would reduce conflict if you held to those 10 things.
Right. And like, to the point of this episode, if we are looking at this from the perspective of an authoritarian who's trying to keep us all in line, then this is a set of rules. But if we look at it from the perspective of someone who's trying to get a group of people who don't know how to be with themselves to learn how to be together and to learn who their God is. This isn't a strict set of rules. This is like, don't be a dick and everything will be fine.
The best book I read last year was called The Framers' Coup, and it's about the Constitution. It's about the U.S. Constitution coming together. Just fantastic. Treat yourself, especially if you have problems sleeping. It's the best book in the world to fall asleep to. It is unreal how much the folks who are putting together the U.S. Constitution think that it's a placeholder. Yeah, and they're just like, let's get this down. Let's get something that works. We really need a structure for right now. Yep. And it's so beautiful, and has so many elements to it that have utility and grounding. That by today, there's some traditions that say this is divinely inspired, kind of thing. And I think that there is a lot of that going on with Moses. I'm just trying to make sure we don't die in the desert killing one another.
And like the 10 Commandments are like, let's put the 10 Commandments in this category where it's like the Bill of Rights. These are the unassailable rules. Mm-hmm. God is first, and don't be dicks to each other. And then from there, it gets more and more specific because he has to keep addressing more and more specific things. But these are the ones that were written in stone. Right? And it's very simple, and it is also very broad.
What do you read there as a 9? Simple yet broad.
I don't want to be controlled, and I also have no interest in controlling other people.
Right, yeah.
I don't want to have to tell you what to do. I want you to be a grown-up, man, and just like don't step on my toes, and I won't step on your toes, and we're going to be fine. But excellent. You have to be an adult.
That's good. Get into Leviticus. You're going to see a whole list of ways that everything becomes peaceful again. Mm-hmm. You did something awful. This is what you do with 2 doves and their blood. And it's very physical. You come into the tabernacle. You come into the tent that houses the presence of God. And you believe that when I slaughter these doves in this way, it makes everything okay, and I can go back to being okay.
Right.
That's a very 9 way to be in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Physical
there's
peacemaking.
Something cathartic about it, and if you read it from the perspective of someone who is trying to make peace, then you see. Like the point of this is a catharsis. The point of so many of these temple rules and the sacrifices and all of it, it's not because if you sin, then you can just do these things and then not worry about it anymore. It's about making peace with your community. It's about doing something to show that you recognize what you did was wrong and then moving on.
It can't, and this is a practice that has massive contemporary power. If you look at some of the stuff that Desmond Tutu did and stuff kind of coming out of Rwanda, when you had communities who wholesale were slaughtering one another, or in Desmond Tutu's case, when you have true racial divisions that led to some horrifying things, and he is saying, if you come and confess, forgiveness will be granted. We need to name what happened, and then there is the promise of grace so that we can move forward as a people. That's some powerful stuff.
Right.
And it works, and it's here in the text very early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's also an element of like the 9-ishness of like, I have no expectation that somebody who has never followed rules in their entire life is all of a sudden going to become a perfect representation of humanity.
Yep.
But what I can do is move them one step forward with information that they already have. The sacrificial system was part of the whole world. Like, this is how they understood themselves and their relationship to gods in all of the world at this time. And so Moses offers a way within that understanding to move these people forward a step or two.
You'll notice one of the things that's never commanded, except for once, and it's immediately said, we're not going to do it this way, is in the Hebrew tradition, you never sacrifice people.
Right.
There is a story of Isaac, and God says, this isn't how we're going to do it. Here's a ram. In Moses, human beings are never the object of sacrifice. I think there's something there as well.
Yeah. And I think even if we put Moses as the author of the story of Abraham, then like that, the importance of recognizing that this may be how you understand the world, and when it actually comes to the point God says we're not doing it this way, like there is still like a mediator kind of thumbprint on this.
Right. Moses gets fed up with the folks, needs to figure out how to get us organized, withdraws, goes up on a mountain.
Yep.
You're going up on the mountain on Sinai, it's a withdrawal for the sake of control.
Yeah.
And one's own peace. He's in a
spot. He needs a break from these clowns. He's tired.
Doesn't want to be there.
These clowns are just the grumbliest. Oh, man. They're free. Why don't you just go be free? No, they're gravy.
Has 10 commandments, comes down. They've built a idol because they're idiots is the take. And he's furious. And this is one of those places. His rage comes up, smashes the tablets. Again, 9's in anger. Just comes out all over that story.
Yep.
Redoes the 10 commandments, and then they enter the desert. They're going back to their homeland. They're going to the land that Abraham once possessed. It should not take all that long.
Right.
9 leader that he is, it takes him 40 years.
Okay. Leading is probably a... I mean, he's the guy writing the words down, but I don't know if leading... Like, he's definitely not at the front of the caravan, right?
They have entrusted... There are a lot of 9 leaders in America. I think like a 9's often, especially in a democratic or a situation where there's not a strong man.
Yeah.
9's can often come into leadership roles because they're able to see all the sides.
Right.
The only trustworthy person here is Al. Kind of thing.
But also 9's leadership is so much about maintaining stasis.
Yes.
Like getting to a place where things are working.
40 years in the desert.
It is not about moving from here to there. You need a 3, a 7, or an 8 for that. Right. You need a 1 to come in and say you got to fix things. 9's are like, if things are working, why would we change it?
We got bread and water.
We got quail.
I don't know.
We got water. We got our tent.
You know what?
Things are good.
Tearing down the tent every single week, that takes effort.
God, so much work, guys, right? And the people who are actually doing it are complaining to me constantly. So why would I force them to do something that I'm not really on board with?
I feel like I'm laughing at Sunday school jokes. But it is the case. Your presence matters is the heart's message for 9's. And I want to say that's what God is communicating through to Moses and what Moses is trying to communicate to everybody. There's something about your physicality that really matters here. And this is how it's established in these rhythms.
Yeah. And according to the stories, like God makes his presence known to the people. Yeah. But he doesn't speak with them. He chooses Moses specifically.
Yeah, the mediator is all over the story. Yeah. Last thing here is the use of past tools is all over how things get set up. The Jewish people, more than any other people, on earth, may the tradition coming out of China is of this sort, but like it's remember that you were slaves in Egypt. Yeah. And it's those tools you're pulling from the past in order to inform what's happening today.
And not like there's a heavy theme of remember what your body was doing. Remember your physical experience of being a slave. Not remember the data, not remember your feelings. Remember what it was like to actually be under someone else's thumb, and that God brought you out of that in a physical way.
You were controlled.
Yeah.
And God brought you into a place of rest.
Yep.
I mean, isn't that what that is? I mean, the promised land ends up, that's all that is. It's the image of home, but it's not necessarily relational in nature. Like, you're not going to the promised land because that's where your family is and you want to be reunited. That's a real common story, but that's not the story in the Exodus narrative.
Right.
The Exodus narrative is about rest. We're going to the place where we're going to.
This isn't the hero's journey. It's something different.
It's not a Odysseus.
A 9 did not write the hero's journey.
Right. It's for all you twos out there. That's good.
One of the only other things I really want to say about Moses is the fact that he didn't get to go into the promised land.
Let's talk about it.
Is like I feel like I can fully imagine like being in the place of Moses and like 40 years of life having experienced this thing and then 40 years in the desert leading these lunatics, and then at the end of it God's like, bad news, friend. You did something that I told you not to do, and as much as you have done, this part isn't for you.
Yeah.
And I can literally feel my body moving into resignation, just being like, okay, I understand. I don't like it, but I understand, and I guess that's the way it is. Like the resignation of someone not being able to see the goal.
Yeah.
Is we'll talk about that a little bit again when we get to 3s.
That's what I was gonna say. There's a 3 that has
very different response.
It is. I love that you brought that up. By the way, we're mentioning David right there.
Yeah.
That's so good. All right. Anything else on Moses?
Hey, I'm in charge of this. All right. You got anything else to say on Moses?
I don't. I would love to talk about Matthew, though.
I'm in.
Okay, so I got 2 prefaces on Matthew. One,
okay,
I'm not going to argue you on the 9 verse 1.
Okay.
I would love to play out both sides.
Okay.
Second, this is going to be one of the places. So we've been talking about Moses as both a character and a potential author.
Right.
And with Matthew, we shift hard toward an author who's telling a story.
Yes.
Who has priorities.
Yes.
What's real interesting, so just background on Matthew. Matthew is likely the second or third gospel written. Matthew is written to a Jewish audience. Most of the early Christians are Jewish. His community is likely the community of James, the brother of Jesus. It's likely the Jerusalem community. It's likely those who are in Israel who are trying to follow this crucified Jesus after the temple has been destroyed. And that's the context in which Matthew is writing. What's real interesting about Matthew is Matthew sees Jesus as the new Moses. So the structure of Matthew's book is 5 sermons. Moses, as was said, wrote 5 scrolls. The Torah is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Mm-hmm. What happens with Matthew's book about Jesus is he's trying to picture Jesus as the new Moses, and he does so with 5 sermons. Sermon on the Mount is the first one, and then there's 4 others.
Yep.
Long story short, Matthew has an audience, and Matthew is writing at a certain point in time.
Yep. And
Matthew has an agenda, and it's very much to picture Jesus as the new Moses, the new leader who's going to lead us out of this time of slavery into some new freedom. Mm-hmm. And that's what it looks like for Matthew when Jesus is executed and resurrected, is that there is some sort of new exodus at hand. Mm-hmm. Quick footnote here. The most important book that I read when I decided to be a Christian again after I deconstructed and all the rest. It's called The Four Witnesses, and it's actually on this. It's by a Oxford scholar named Robin Griffith Jones. This author goes through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John and just talks about the perspective that they bring to the story. And for whatever reason, when I read that book, I was like, this is the God I've been looking for. And that was my conversion experience. And so I can't recommend the book highly enough. The Four Witnesses. If you want to get into this sort of stuff, again, this is more about hermeneutics. It's more about like how the authors were telling the story of Jesus and why it mattered. But for whatever reason, that was the thing that I needed in my journey, and I kind of went down the Christian road after doing that. So Mark is the first book written about Jesus, and it's a revolutionary tale because it's a new form of literature. The gospel is a new form of literature, but Matthew is following Mark and structures their book with a mind toward how do I speak to the community that we've been talking about. I would love to talk about nines. I don't know what comes to my mind in terms of Matthew as a 9, but I have a handful of 1 arguments.
Sure.
But again, I'm real loose on this.
The reading of Matthew it reads, in my mind, it reads much more this is what happened than the other 3 books in a way that is like includes details that nobody cares about, and there is a sort of meandering sense to the story when I read it. And
longest of the Gospels.
Yes, longest of the Gospels, and in the same way that communicate these things, help this group of people understand these things, it seems like that's what Matthew's doing. And there's analogous, like there's a lot of sort of analogy type of language in the same way that I am now telling you about what Moses did in order to help you understand Matthew a little bit better. I think there's a lot of that in Matthew.
I think that works well. Oftentimes, when doing New Testament criticism, here's what a lot of contemporary scholars are going to do. They're going to have what are called parallel harmonies of the gospel. What you put, what these books do is they take the stories of Jesus in the 4 gospels, they put them in, side by side. So how does Luke tell the story? How does Mark tell the story? How does John tell the story? And all the rest. Yeah. What's interesting is not only how each author tells what they tell, but also what do some authors add and what do some authors remove.
Right.
And so moving to ones for a moment, and we can talk about generally who ones are when we get to the next author, but the structural spirituality is something that I see in the Sermon on the Mount that is very black and white, and it's very judgmental. Everything in Matthew 7 is black and white. It's sheep and goats. It's this road that leads to destruction, this road that leads to life. You build your house on the sand, you build your house on the rock. They're very black and white categories. Matthew 6, I'm kind of going backwards here, is you need to trust God with everything. They are, don't worry, it's Jesus saying, don't worry about what you'll eat or drink. God is in control. We've talked about the heart's message for all the types, but this is the heart's message for ones. It's essentially that God is in control and that you should relinquish your need to fix everything, as it were, to the sovereign God. And there is Matthew 5, again, I'm going backwards, there is a purging of the negative elements, not in your behavior, but inside you. So Jesus says, you've heard it said, don't murder. I tell you, get rid of your anger. You've heard it said, don't commit adultery. I tell you, get rid of your lust. That is a very one-ish way of coming to the world. And Matthew 5 ends with, be perfect as your Father is perfect. That's about as one-ish of statement of spirituality as you can get. The judgment of Jesus is only told in Matthew's story of him, at the end of all things, there's going to be a judgment. Sheep go one way, goats go another. That's an image that I suppose resonates with me as a one, that we're going to separate y'all. notice it's not on what you believe, it's on what you did. It's a very physical judgment. So in that story, Jesus, who is the judge, says to those who go into the realm of life, when I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. And the people who are going, into this heavenly space say, when did we do that? This is the first time I've met you. And he's like, when you clothed the least of these, when you fed the least of these, you were clothing and feeding me. And so too, the opposite for those who are destroyed. That judgment feels quite one-ish to me. And again, the organization, I suppose the intentional organization around those 5 sermons just strikes me as that's something that one would do. And I particularly want to bookend the first sermon and the last sermon. The first sermon begins with the Beatitudes. By the way, if you want to read a really great book, the Jeff Cook wrote a book on the Beatitudes called 7. You should go buy it after you buy The 4 Witnesses by Robert Griffith Jones. But the last sermon in Matthew is the woes. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, teachers of the law. You're full of dead men's bones and everything unclean. He goes off on the religious rulers. Yeah. This isn't anti-Semitic. He's not talking about all Jews. He's talking about a specific group of people whose inner life is toxic. Yeah. And that's also a very one thing, is to see the thing within you and to say that needs to be purged. And so anyway, that way of coming to the Jesus story strikes me as a way that one might elevate the historic occurrences. Yeah.
And I think that this is a great example of why a lot of people say that deciding between 9 and 1 is one of the hardest places. Like 9s and 1s often really struggle with landing on their type because 9s and 1s can that line is so thin,
right?
And because everything that you said, I can respond to with a 9 perspective. Yeah. Like there's the idea of structuring this story in a way to emulate the thing that you were trying to tell. Like if this is about Moses, structuring it in the way that Moses would have structured his work. Like I am constantly trying to shoehorn in 9s and 3s when we do work. Like anytime we make a list, I want it to be a list of 9. Like there's some type of symbolic symmetry there that I want to exist. And I fully recognize that it's relatively meaningless, but I still do it as often as possible.
Right.
All of the things that you listed from the Sermon on the Mount, all of those things, there is a sense of black and white, but also it seemed like when I read this, I go through a sense of the black and white presentation is for a point. It's not. It's to get people to see when you behave out of anger is a problem, but really the anger is the real problem. Throw out a sharp contrast.
Yeah, fair.
Like there's so much about all of that seems to me more imagery for the sake of getting to the point than necessarily creating a dichotomous understanding of these things.
Sure.
This is a really good example of if Matthew is writing from a perspective of trying to make peace, be a mediator, to try and showcase that he does not mention himself except for one time where he basically says, and then Jesus called Matthew, who was a tax collector. And later, they were at dinner. And that's it. That's the whole calling of Matthew. And Matthew isn't there to tell his story. He's there to tell this story.
I suppose we haven't even talked about that story. That's probably very valuable on this front. Matthew is a tax collector.
Right.
This is also a 9-1 kind of image. So it is very important. Being a tax collector in the Gospels doesn't mean you work for the IRS.
Right.
Being a tax collector in the Gospels means you're a traitor.
Right.
You were a local kid in a local community, and the Romans invaded, and you decided to raise your hand and say, I know everybody in our town and what they probably make, and I can get their 10%, their 20%, their 80%. And so you're a sellout.
Right.
The reason that Matthew's gospel is called Matthew because in the other, this character is called Levi.
Right.
He's, by the way, his name is Levi because he's a Levite and he ought to have been a priest is what that means. But instead, he's a sellout.
And somebody has to sort of drag him into his calling as a priest?
This is true. No, it's like Jesus' encounter with him. I don't have it in front of me, but Jesus' encounter with him goes in essence like that. It's like, you need to leave your table. Come follow me. Why are you wasting your life?
Mm-hmm. You have something more important that you could be doing.
So it's all speculation that character would be the one who's authoring this book, but tradition would have it as. Only other thing that hits me with Matthew is the last line, which is the Great Commission, and it's very active. Go into all the world. It's just such an active command to end with. And I want you to teach these things. That ends up being so, that feels one-ish to me. Just
I could go either way on it. Because he's not saying go into the world and fix all of the things. Go into the world and...
It's proclaim that Jesus is king is what it is.
Yeah. One of my sort of life advice mantras is figure out what you want and then just do what you want. But you have to know what you want first.
Right.
And so it's not prescriptive in a way of this is what you should do. It's the prescription is go do the thing that you know you're supposed to do. That's it. And whatever that is up to you. That's the mantra part of it. But like that last line, he's not giving specific direction about what to do and where. He's saying go tell this story.
I think that's right. Yeah, there is there's not a forcing taking place here. Despite the pathetic Christian history that might be associated with this. There is an open-handedness. I think that's right. Bang. Only other thing that hits me ends up being the Beatitudes. Maybe this is a good place to end. We're going to get, when we talk about the next one, they're going to talk a lot about grace. The Beatitudes are the image of grace. It's like it's unmerited favor coming for people who are in terrible shape. That's what the Beatitudes are. It's that the world has been turned upside down because Jesus is king. And now the mourning, the meek, those hungry and thirsty for justice. There's a body type image. The poor in spirit, inward, having an inward poverty. Those who are merciful, those who, I can get through all these.
I hope so. You wrote a book.
Merciful, pure in heart, peacemaking, and persecuted. All like the favor of God is coming for all of you. And that's what the Beatitudes are, is just like the world has been turned upside down and God's favor is coming for you.
Yeah.
As I say it, it's not necessarily like there's not an earning taking place here.
Right.
But as we'll see when we get to the next one, earning is, you transcend earning to get to the highest forms of spirituality. It's just reception. It's reception of gifts is like the highest form of spirituality for a one. And so, and anyway, that's kind of what I see there with the Beatitudes.
Well, and obviously, transcend the sort of shadow sides of whatever to get to whatever, but the Beatitudes to me do not speak to fixing or repairing or being made whole.
Okay.
It's those who are in terrible places, God's favor is on you.
Yeah. They are, it's such a, they're poetically structured to be almost a promise.
Yeah. But like those who mourn are not going to, like, it's not that you're going to get the thing back that you were mourning. It's not that you're going to be fixed. It's that you're going to be comforted.
Yeah. The image, for me, the image is here, like the world is catastrophically broken. What does it look like if it were the case that heaven invaded and you were all of a sudden, consumed by the presence of heaven? What would it look like?
Yeah.
meek, you will inherit the earth. Meek, by the way, those of you who have been, had boots put on your neck and you've been crushed and everything that you care about has been taken from you, you will inherit the earth. Everything that the wicked have stored up as treasures is going to be ripped out of their hands. It's going to be placed in your hands. Mm-hmm. You who are mourning, comforted. You who are hungry and thirsty for justice, filled. Yeah, it's like heaven's here, and it has invaded.
It's not fixing language.
Right. Yeah. Jumping to the end of Matthew's story. No, this isn't Matthew. This is John. You're going to see that the resurrected Jesus has nail wounds in his arms still. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those nail wounds aren't quote unquote fixed.
Right. Yeah. They're a part of him now.
Yeah. It's part of the story. That's what new creation looks like for the Christians. It's you're taking all the broken pieces, putting them together in some beautiful. This is lots of early Christian art is mosaics, and that's the image. Mm-hmm. You take these broken pieces, you put them into interesting, beautiful arrangements, and you create something new. That's what God's doing with the whole creation.
Yeah.
Bing. You want? I can't leave.
Transition. So transitioning from there to actually talking about ones.
Ones.
Tell me about ones. What do ones want?
Ones want wholeness. Ones want to feel good. Don't want to be at fault. Ones don't want anything to be spoiled inside of them. They're going to be completely whole is the deep desire. Don't want to be at fault.
The absolute best version of themselves.
But they're highly self-critical. When they are aware of their flaws, they are highly self-critical. I should say that.
Yeah.
Again, judgmental, but a lot of their judgment goes inward. Mm-hmm. Body types, angry, earners, idealists. Idealists is going to be a big part of our discussion.
Yep.
And are going to solve problems logically. Improvers is a word that will probably come up.
Improvers, yeah.
I don't know that I have not seen an Enneagram list of Bible authors that hasn't put Paul as a 1. All of them.
I have, but it was wrong, so it's fine.
You're kicked off the island.
So Paul, you think Paul was a 1, right?
I want to start with idealism, because I think if you were to take the canon of Paul's letters, so Paul is, I want to say it's 13 letters in the New Testament. So when you think about
allegedly.
No, and that's important to note. It may very likely be the case that some of the letters are written by his students or people in his community or people that have come after his passing. So we could talk about that.
I think it is really important for us to, like Paul is by far one of the most controversial subjects of theology discussion, and we are well aware, we have been part of the inappropriate use of Paul in order to do bad things in the name of Jesus.
Yep.
And we're not in support of that. And I think that this, if nothing else comes from this whole discussion of biblical authors, I think the fact that Paul, we need to understand Paul's motivation in order to understand Paul will help us, it has helped me have a little more grace while reading Paul, and also to make it easier for me to say, oh, that thing that doesn't sound anything like Paul and doesn't fit into his motivation, that probably wasn't him. And now I can just put it aside from Paul.
There's a fantastic book, if you want to get into Paul, on exactly the front that TJ is. John Dominic Crossan, Marcus Borg wrote a book called The First Paul. I want to say it's The First Paul. I've given all my good books away. I'm looking for it on my shelf. I'm like, damn it, it's another book that I've given away. Yeah, I got that right. Okay. 2 things I want to say here. 1, this is true of Paul's letters. It's also true of the Bible itself. And it's true of the Enneagram. Things that have power can be abused by terrible human beings.
Yep.
Some people are pathetic. Some people are naive. Some people don't know how to read. It sucks that you don't know how to read. It sucks that you're so insecure about your masculinity that this is how it's expressed in the world. Right. That doesn't affect my faith, and that doesn't affect how I see God, but you're a pathetic human being. and I've had 2 glasses of wine. Thank you very much. the thing about Paul is I think that in my experience, the critiques that come at Paul are identical to the critiques I hear about me. And like, I know what it's like to critique a one. I know what it feels like to be critiqued as a one. Mm-hmm. And half the time, you're right. The great thing, like if you set aside the God-breathedness of Paul's letter and say, let's talk about this human being for a second, I find some, and again, he shares my type, I find deep sympathy with some of the things that he's trying to do. Mm-hmm. If you don't know this, he is standing in the gap and fighting for the equal status of slaves. He is standing in the gap and fighting for the equal status of women. He is standing in the gap and saying, we need to look at one another with egalitarian eyes because that is the way of Jesus. He is revolutionary on this front. And just because some pathetic guy with a microphone who doesn't know how to read a text or see the historic context doesn't mean that Paul wasn't praiseworthy.
There's one of the things that I am most interested in is, so we talked about we mentioned now but not yet, we talked about the progressive moving, and we also talked about that with nines. Mm-hmm. But there's something particular that's in Paul that is not in who I see as other nines, and that is the explaining it from every angle. Like there is a need to prove himself.
Yeah. He's combative and he wants to be right.
Yeah. And so talk about that with ones.
Yeah. So one, that is how ones are in the world. They want to be right first, and that's how they feel good in the world. Yeah. We outsource a lot of our feeling good in the world to systems. And Paul is absolutely a systematic thinker. He's creating a mental structure that will give him a feeling that he's good in the world. That is what his, this is called soteriology. That is his theory about how Jesus' death works. It is cleansing in its nature. Mm-hmm. But that belief is so core to who he is and how he sees himself that he becomes argumentative with others because of it. So arguably the first thing that's written in the New Testament is one of his letters, which is called Galatians. And he is arguing with another set of people about what makes somebody clean and acceptable in God's sight. His tradition has been that when you are circumcised, when males are born and their foreskin is cut off, that this is a marker that God has marked you, and this makes you part of the family.
Yep.
Paul comes...
It's a good rule. It's a rule, and like it's very black and white. If you're circumcised, you're part. If you're not circumcised, you're not part.
This is Moses saying, look, we're all in this together.
Yep.
Everybody, all the gentlemen here in this crew, we all have had our junk marked by the living God, so we don't need to fight.
Yep.
We are part of the tribe.
By the way, it's more hygienic because we don't know how to clean things.
Notice how egalitarian this is for Paul. He's like, you know what? You're excluding half the population with this way of thinking.
Yep.
The women are accepted by God also, by the way, and they don't got junk they don't have any foreskins to cut off. What truly marks somebody is not the circumcision of their junk. It's the circumcision of their heart, that being done by a inner process where we thrust ourselves on the mercy of God displayed in Jesus on the cross. Mm-hmm. This is what Galatians is about. He is on fire in Galatians. He is yelling at people. He is talking about how he got in public, fights with Peter, who apparently is quite important and rather close to Jesus, and saying, I confronted this person to their face about how they were getting this wrong.
It's not that just Peter should be ignored. He needs to convince Peter of the truth.
All of it's an argument. Paul is so fired up about how Jesus' death is what makes people clean and not circumcision that he says to his interlocutors, I really wish that they would just go ahead and cut their whole dick off to show how righteous they are. That feels extreme.
There's a level of sort of resentment carried in a statement like that is, I think, very representative of oneness.
There's a self-righteousness that's in Paul, especially in the early letters.
Yeah.
Paul grows up. All of us, thank God all of us get to grow up a little bit, but Paul, a Bible writer, he grows up. Like his later letters, if you think that 2 Timothy is actually written by Paul, he is a much more mature person than he is in Galatians. And you should read those in tandem.
Well, and like the bragging about how perfect he is, like it's not just self-righteousness, but it's like notice all of the ways in which I have followed all of the rules.
Let's talk about that.
Notice all of the things that I have done in order to make sure that I am good according to this system.
His earner side is severe in two ways. One, his whole theology is about how you cannot earn the grace of God.
Right.
And yet when he wants to make a point to his audience, he always tells people his resume.
Yep.
It's severe. In 2 Corinthians, which is it's the most one-ish writing in the Bible, it is a one in pain. And there's one section where he just goes off in terms of how much he has suffered, all the things that he has done, everything that he has earned to have some standing in the mind of his audience. Let me talk about Romans for a second. So Romans is arguably the greatest thing that's ever been written in terms of the Western canon. In terms of its influence, it arguably is what launches the medieval period, and it arguably is what launches the Reformation, which leads to modernity. If you jump to post-modernity, Derrida, Wittgenstein, both influenced by Romans as well. The thing about Romans is that he is making an argument.
Yep.
And so here's the structure. Here's actually the background in history. There's a ruler, a Caesar, who kicks out all the Jews from Rome. He's an anti-Semite. He sends all the Jews away. Many of these Jews go to places where they adopt Christian expressions of their Judaism. That ruler dies, and then these Jews who had been displaced are able to return home.
Yeah.
They get to go back to Rome. What ends up happening in the meantime, when all the Jews had been kicked out of Rome, is that Christianity had still found its way to Rome, and people who weren't Jewish, what the New Testament often calls Gentiles, had also become Christians. And so you have this interesting new phenomenon where Jewish Christians and non-Jewish Christians are in the same city, but they are disagreeing because they're coming to this Christian faith in very different ways.
Because the Jewish Christians had thousands of years of Jewish history that also informed how they behave and understand themselves and their place in the world and like what the rules are. And literally everyone else didn't have that history.
Yes. Most of that has to do with holy days and what you eat. So if you look at, just jumping to the end, if you look at Romans 14 and 15, Paul says, this is why I'm writing. Y'all are arguing about holy days and what you eat. And this needs to stop. You need to stop this. We are united for different reasons. Here's the structure of the argument in Romans. Romans 1 through 3, he essentially says, hey, you Gentiles, here's where you consistently are doing things wrong. Judgmental one that he is.
Yep.
Hey, you Jewish Christians, Romans 2, here's all the ways that you're doing things wrong.
Judgmental one that he is.
Romans 3, all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. He wants to start by saying, you guys are all screwed up.
Yep.
And
you people on the left, you're screwed up. You people on the right, you're screwed up. All y'all are screwed up.
So guess what? There's one thing that unites you. There's one thing that makes you the same. And it's just how screwed up you are.
Yeah.
So again, sit down, be humble.
Yep.
4, 5, 6, 7 this is how God has repaired your screwed upness. Romans 8 is there's a new creation at hand. God is leading, Christ is repairing all of the earth. And then the most important chapters in Romans are 9, 10, and 11, which everybody skips. And it's, you Jewish Christians, you Gentile Christians, you are two rivers that are coming together in a confluence, and you're made to be together. You are, he uses the image of a tree having a branch grafted onto it. Apparently you can take a oak tree and put it into an elm tree and sew it together and make a beautiful tree. There's apparently you can do that in ancient
That sounds like
agriculture.
nonsense to me, but I do know that it works for grapes.
12 and 13 is the stuff that you should do, but 14, 15, and 16 ends up being the high point of the letter. It's the conclusion of the letter. It's you all need to become one family. But notice the structure of Romans, it's all an argument. I need you to believe the way I believe. This is the right way to believe so that we can all be one ideal family.
Yeah.
And it's so idealistic.
And sort of like shifting his argument from like the people on the left side of the stage to the people on the right side of the stage, and now all the people, and then the people in the middle section, and the people on the left section, and the people on the right section, and like just really thoroughly covering his bases to make sure that everyone is hit in a way that like he is over and over and over and over and over again arguing the same point and making sure that everyone hears each version. And everyone has a version that's for like that. There's a thoroughness to make sure that his argument is sound.
It's arguable that Romans takes many months. He's camping in, I want to say he's in Corinth, and he spends a winter just writing this one letter, which, by the way, is delivered by a woman, and that woman reads the letter to each of the churches because she's the one entrusted to teach this material to the recipients. Not that matters all that much in, say, our day, but you see it in,
that's fair.
You see that in Romans 16. It's part of the letter.
Well, I think that's like it's so easy to point out with Romans, but I think so much of Paul's canon is there's a thoroughness with which he is structuring the things that he needs to say.
Yeah. Yep.
And there's a like, I want you to understand where I'm coming from so that you know why I'm saying this.
All over his stuff.
Yeah.
This is where I'm coming from is a great one-ish quality that all over Paul.
Yeah. And it's this way of, you've said it more eloquently than this in the past, but it's this way of sort of like presenting the resume, making sure that you know my motivation isn't corrupt. You know my motivation behind these things so that when I present them, it will be sort of above reproach.
Yeah. That's exactly right.
So there's two other things that I for sure want to make sure get put into this discussion, and the first one is that Paul doesn't spend a whole lot of time talking about his feelings, and I think that is really important to note.
Except for when he's in stress. For anyone who wants to do this study, read 2 Corinthians.
Yeah.
It's a man who is brutally stressed out, and it's all focused on his past failures with this community, but trying to justify himself.
And it's really not even as much talking about his feelings as much as like acknowledging the struggles. It's
an awkward location he's landed.
Yeah.
He doesn't feel comfortable in 2 Corinthians. So here's the story behind 2 Corinthians. There's a community that he invested heavily in who've just straight up rejected him. Just said, your teachings don't matter to us. They've essentially adopted other people to lead them and have just tossed Paul away.
Yeah.
The whole thing is kind of this appeal. He keeps referring to how he was a father in their life and how much he essentially has suffered on their behalf to be in this position of authority. He's always wanting, there's both the I've suffered for you, but I want to retain my authority in your life.
I also want to draw attention to the thorn in his side.
Yes.
Because I think this is a really important thing to remember about Paul. And whether or not it was that he is gay is not part of this discussion.
Might be.
But the oneness of saying that you have a deep, dark struggle that you have tried to get rid of and you just can't.
Right.
But never actually saying what it is.
Yeah.
Like that to me, that like I can't imagine other types saying this thing but not saying the whole thing.
Using a metaphor to say I have something inside me that's broken and I can't tell you about it, but
yeah,
I wasn't convinced of that as a reference, and I think I'm coming around to thinking that's a real option.
Yep.
One, Paul is clearly he's a celibate man. He's a single man, and he wrestles through a lot of this. I think so. My own take on the 3 passages in the New Testament that address queer sexuality, 2 of them are about adult males abusing little kids, and one of them is about an orgy. That's how they need to be read. And as a Christian myself, I think that 1, you shouldn't rape little boys, and 2, I think orgies are gross.
Yeah.
And probably you should avoid those in terms of being a healthy human being.
Sure.
These are not about monogamous same-sex relationships.
Right.
And it's just silly as hell to think that they are. It's just silly as hell to think that they are. There's just nothing there. Yeah. I did a debate with a well-known scholar on this front, and you can look it up if you want to, Jeff Cook and Preston Sprinkle, if you want to see more on that. But my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness, is what God says over Paul, who says, I have this thing I need you to take from me, and I'm pleading with you 3 times to take it away. Mm-hmm. Very internal. It's very you and me, God.
Yep.
It's improvement focused.
There's an earning element within it. If he believes hard enough, then all he has to do is ask.
And there's a high point of one spirituality that God is in control, and I'm being submissive to God's sovereignty. Yeah. And that's the holy order is the holy idea for ones, and knowing that God orders the world is a place for the heart of a one to land. And this is the recommendation by the Enneagram, as it were. God is in control. You got to get into that spot.
Yep.
And that's where that drives.
And like for the character of Paul and also for the author, Paul, I think the fact that he mentions it but doesn't tell us what it is, like that is,
yeah, I like that.
Like there's so much about oneness in that, like using it as an example, but he's not going to tell you the real like from a one perspective. People don't need to know what the one thing is. That's my private business. Yep. And like it's not going to help the story. The point is what he said. That's the point that he's trying to bring out, and using this as an illustration.
I'm becoming much more aware of this in myself. You brought this up a long time ago, but they're like how do you tell the thing that happened to you, or how do you tell the thing that's most central to your identity and your self-understanding, and it may be really, 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 really terrible.
Yeah.
And you hold it back in exactly the way you're saying, I have a thorn in my flesh.
You're going to acknowledge it, but you don't need any details. That's okay.
There is so much emotion here that gets unsaid, but it gets said.
You got anything else?
I did. I wanted to end with Philemon. Philemon's the last of the Pauline letters. It's the shortest. It really is a treasure. It's only a couple paragraphs. Paul has an encounter with a enslaved man who has run away from his slaveholder. The slaveholder is a Christian man. Paul writes a letter to him, and it is an emancipation letter. And so for anyone who wants to say that Paul is justifying slavery, you have not read the text. And that's okay to be naive, but you haven't read the text.
Yep.
Philemon is him making a passionate argument for the sake of this person. And Philemon is the slaveholder, and I forgot the name of the slave, but it's his name translates to useful. It's like useful here has been such a help to me, and I would like you to receive him not as an enslaved person, but I want you to free him and make him your brother, is what Philemon is about. And what Paul does is he's making things better, and his argument, and it's all an argument for emancipation, is you do realize, Philemon, that you owe me your life, that I suffered so that you could understand who Jesus was. Your redemption, your future, your encounter with God is because I sacrificed for you, and you are going to sacrifice
Onesimus.
Yeah, that's it. Onesimus. Yeah. You're going to die for the sake of Onesimus because this is the way of Jesus. Jesus died for me. I died for you. You will die for Onesimus. This is the way the world is repaired. Such a beautiful image. Yeah. But again, one-ish. Systems, repair, improvement, argument. It's just all over that letter.
There is an amount of that is in place with ones.
Yeah.
They're advocating for other people's growth has to do with the amount of effort and sacrifice that they themselves have put into that other person.
We've earned it.
Yep.
We've earned it. We want control over the things we care about.
Yep.
And this might be another, like, Paul is a flawed person. and even in this emancipation letter saying, I have control over you. You do understand that I've earned this.
Right.
Is an undercurrent here.
But it speaks to the oneness, and it also speaks to Paul's heart of trying to get this like really serious, like this isn't specifically about Onesimus because he wants Onesimus freed.
Yeah.
It's coming from Paul's heart of this institution is problematic, and I can't fix the institution, but I can help Onesimus.
Yeah. He can't. This is exactly right. By the way, this is how you should read slavery in the New Testament. He can't fix the institution. He knows he can't fix the institution. The thing about Paul is he thinks that Jesus is coming back in the next 12 minutes.
Right.
He thinks you don't need to fix the screwed up economy.
Yep.
All of us know that the American economy is screwed up. What are we going to do about it? What Paul wants to say is essentially that. It's like, well, you know what? Jesus is coming back in any second now. Slaves, obey your masters because like those motherfuckers are going to go to hell in a minute. That's what the argument is.
Yeah.
The people who are abusing you, do what Jesus said. Love your enemies, pray for them, serve them. You are going to be free in a minute. Now, he's clearly wrong about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not alone here in thinking that Paul believes Jesus is coming back in his lifetime.
Right.
I think that is well known across the board with New Testament scholars.
I mean, it's clear in the reading of Paul.
And that affects his ethic.
And it also speaks to his oneness of being present focused.
Ooh.
The future that he's aiming for is coming any second now. And so we need to focus on what we're doing right now.
That's exactly right.
He cannot envision a future where Jesus is not coming back in a couple of months.
Exactly right. By the way, going to hell in my mind means your soul is destroyed. I think eternal conscious torment is a silly idea.
We'll take your letters. We're both...
I already wrote a published book on this, and so everybody that had things to get off their chest. I actually moved the conversation, by the way. Christianity Today picked up my lead. Those suckers have some clout. Nobody ever quotes me, but...
I have that magazine.
Yeah, come on. It's like, I'm just ahead of the curve on all this stuff. Yeah. This is why I'm holding out. I'm giving Enneagram at least 12 years because I'm always way too far ahead of the curve.
Funny.
Go ahead.
Oh, that's
what you got?
That was it.
You should probably close this one down.
Hey, I'm in charge here.
I know it. Meanderer that you are. I was just making recommendations.
We could talk about Paul for ages and ages and ages. We really could. Is there anything you want to say specifically about Paul, more broadly about ones in general?
I do. Let me just say,
it's got to be a thorough argument, folks.
my favorite book by a one is 2 Corinthians. My second favorite book is Job. Job is misunderstood.
Mm-hmm.
Also, one, the clue to Job is that the person who wrote the book of Job was Job. The entire book is about self-criticism. The entire book is an inner dialogue. The entire book is about a man who's trying to justify himself after this tragedy hit his family. And it's an internal monologue. My kids died. I thought I was a good person. I thought I did everything right. And then he pens the voice of the inner critic. It's such a great book for a one when you understand that this is what's going on. And the end of the book of Job is God coming to him, notice this, and saying, Job, I need you to stand up. The entire book of Job, his kids have died. He goes to the place that they died. He finds their ashes, and he covers his body in the ashes of his dead kids. And the entire book is him meditating in the ashes of his dead kids. Then a whirlwind comes, and the voice of God comes out of it. And what had happened is the whirlwind in the first or second chapter is what killed his kids. And the voice out of the whirlwind says, I want to show you some stuff. And he says, where were you when I created the sea? And where were you when I created whales and lions and the mountains? And where were you when I created all of these things? And Job is invited to rise out of the ashes and to go and look at this creation that God orchestrates, oversees, and is in total control over. And that's the holy idea for the one, is God is in control of everything. And look at all the things that God is creating. God lists like 98 things that God is creating, and there's one thing that God leaves off of the list. And the thing that God leaves off of the list is Job himself. Don't you realize that I'm creating you and fashioning you into your immortal, eternal self? That's my take on Job. But the oneness in Paul and the oneness in Job, both of them improvement, both of them highly self-condemning, both of them needing to get into a place where God is the one who is overcoming all of their faults. And so for Paul, it's Jesus has died and has cleansed you thoroughly, justified you. And so that's off the table now. Now you can be a healthy human being and move forward. And it's identical in Job. God is the one who is creating you. Yep. Take that off the table. You don't need to beat yourself up anymore.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I like that. I have no argument against that.
I'm the only person who likes Job. I go to bat for Job.
I love Job.
What? Okay. Well,
I loved you and I have very different takes on it, but I love Job.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right. So we've been talking for several hours. Do you want to keep going or? No, I'm kidding. I do not want to keep going.
Let's sign this sucker off. We can pick up with the twos next time.
Hey, I'm in charge of this. So I think this is a good place for us to stop hitting the body triad because we spent 2.5 hours talking about them. And we're going to get to the others next time. But this is the space where we ask for all of the things like reviews and stars and all this stuff. Realistically, folks, the point of the reviews and the stars is to help other people see it. The computers, the machines work in a certain way where the more reviews and stars we have, the more they put it in front of other people's faces. And that is the big thing that we're asking for.
This is such a compelling pitch right now.
Hey, I'm in charge.
I know it.
I personally do not care as much about the affirmation.
We have been stuck on 284 for at least 4 months.
284 reviews.
284 reviews. Nobody cares about us anymore.
All the people who are going to review have already done
it.
We just need to find more. It really does help us to know that people like what we're doing and aren't just hate listening to us. And it does help Jeff know that we're doing a good thing here. And it is really valuable to us to know that we should continue this.
It's okay.
Work.
God's in control and loves me. And
God's in control and all the things.
I don't need stars.
Yeah. We do have access to, you can find our podcasts at our website, aroundthecircle.org. You can also find links to our Patreon. If you think this is worth supporting, maybe giving a couple of bucks a month, that helps us do all the administrative stuff, like pay for the website and buy equipment and all the things.
Recently, Patreon is funding our Descript subscription, which allows me to transcribe all of our podcasts to create a book.
Yeah.
Now, I know there's people out there that really want a book because I get your messages. So if you want a book, Patreon is the way to help us.
That's one of the things that it's paying for. If we ever have events or you want to find more information about us, aroundthecircle.org is the right place. This music that you're listening to is by our friend Brian Claxon. He's amazing. He's we're very happy that we know him and that he gave us permission to do this. And the music at the beginning of this is from The Collection, which is another really great band, friends of ours. Is there anything else? Did I get everything?
Just to plug it again, that Songwriters series that we did is gold.
Yeah.
It's money.
Yeah.
Go listen to that.
I feel like this episode is going to sort of like straddle the line between our regular stuff and our pop culture stuff because it's not really pop culture, but there's a lot of good stuff in there in the pop culture feeds. So movie typing and Start Here. Those are our other podcasts.
I heard this overly long podcast. Paul McCartney was talking about yesterday, and he said somebody had come to him and said, I think this isn't about your lover. I think this is about your mom. And it blew his mind because he realized it was about his mom. His mom had died a couple of years before. And he all of a sudden had this huge epiphany that he had critiqued He had critiqued something small about his mom and how she said a word, and she ended up dying the next day. And
he never forgave himself.
He had sat on that. I said something wrong. Now I long for yesterday. And I read that recently, and I cried so hard. I was like, oh, this poor... It's such a beautiful song.
Oh my
anyway,
gosh.
okay, so that was...
I love
slip that in at the end. See, go listen to the Songwriters thing. It's a great podcast.
There we go. Yeah. That story, that anecdote is not included, but there's some good stuff about Paul McCartney. Okay, we're wrapping it up. Jeff, you got anything else to add?
I got nothing, man.
All right. He's Jeff Cook. He is officially awesome. And I am TJ Wilson. And who you aren't isn't interesting.
Damn straight. It's so much more fun on this side.